Welcome to the video. In this video I'd like to take a look at this model here. Now this is something that a number of subscribers have asked us to take a look at, and it was something that when I first saw I really wasn't sure about because it's unlike anything else that we've flown or played with here. Now there are two kind of classes of quadcopter. We tend to do an awful lot on the channel with the ones that are kind of carbon fibre plates and aluminium standoffs, and that is typically what we end up getting involved in. We've had a couple of tries with the ones with the all enclosed bodies, things like the Nova Pro, and those are for a very different class of pilot. Now I'm a big fan of things like the carbon fibre and like the fact that having a model that has lots of easily changeable parts means it's easy to repair. But because I got so many requests for this thing, I thought we'll get one and we'll have a go. And I need to say up front that actually this is pretty good. It's obviously not for those of us who love to fly the carbon fibre stuff and are for out and out racer. It's designed for FPV, so it has an integrated 600 TVL line camera. It has a FPV transmitter at the back. You do get a little whip style aerial, but that actually works all right pretty close up. You have these big long aerials that come up for the receiver for the Devo 7 radio that you get with it. It has an F3 base flight controller that's running clean flight, and you'll get about 7 minutes out of it. Now what we'll do in the video is we'll have a look at what comes in the box and we'll look at the specs. We'll also then go through the features. I'll talk about some of the things that I've been quite impressed with this thing about, and then we'll go and do a little bit of test flying in the back garden, test the camera and the FPV kit, and then we'll go out into the field and then we'll finish up my final thoughts. I have already been flying this. Now the way we do a lot of the videos is that I literally do the unboxing on the screen, and then the first flight in the back garden is genuinely the first flight. Now I did have the camera running and also the FPV kit recording when I did my first test hovering in the back garden to make sure that everything was working. I've already been flying and playing around with this model, and although it's probably not everybody's cup of tea, it's a lot better than some of the earlier Walkera attempts where they were using multi-way based flight controllers. The GPS was a bit meh. The camera on this is pretty good. Everything seems to work really nicely. The flight controller and the tuning is reasonable too. The fact it uses something like clean flight on there means that for those of you that did want to then get into the guts of it and see how it's all set up, you definitely could too. But this is really aimed at those pilots who just want to get it out of the box, charge the batteries up and go and fly. This is not one I would probably recommend for somebody that's a brand new pilot to remote control. This is probably a little bit too much for that. I'd get something smaller like a Hubsan X4, but for somebody that's already been playing with one of those very small toy grade quadcopters and wants to move up to something a little bit bigger with a proper style radio, this is definitely worth looking at. Now we need to say a very big thank you to the guys at gearbest.com. This model with the radio isn't cheap. It's not inexpensive. It's 163 quid 25 as we're recording the video. But for that you do get everything, including the battery, the radio and all the pieces that you need to go and fly and have quite a cute little FPV quadcopter. So let's talk about what you get in the box. Well, obviously you get the model itself, and the box itself is a big white affair with lots and lots of foam padding. You could actually use it to carry it around in, and as well as the model you get a battery. It's an 800 milliamp 2-cell LiPo battery. You get the charger for it as well. It's not a fantastic charger, but it actually works okay. And you get a Devo 7 radio. The Devo 7 radio that comes with the model isn't bad at all. I've played with a couple of the cheap radios that you get with some of the ready-to-fly quads, and in some of those other videos I've commented on how poor those radios are. This is quite a nice one. It actually feels really good. We have 3 flight modes. You have in the top left-hand corner. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then you have the switches here for additional controls too. Now the Devo 7 is one of those things that gets shipped with quite a lot of stuff these days from Walkera, and I've never had one before. This is my first play with one, and my initial impressions have been pretty positive. It's worked really well. The gimbals are nice and smooth. The ratchet on the throttle is very low, and the display, although it's quite basic with just 7-segment displays, works really well, and it does bind up to the model without any messing about, and before you know it you are ready to fly. In addition to this, you also get some spare props. You get the manual, you get the CD that has the instructions on for this radio, and it is quite a nice package to take apart. It does feel like a quality product. Let me go through some of the features on the model. So as you can see, it's a really unusual model in the way it's kind of laid out and set up. It is very nicely designed. I do like the way this thing looks. It does look like something out of the video game Portal or something out of that film Oblivion with Tom Cruise. That's the kind of feel about it, and it does look really cool when it's flying about. It looks like some kind of science fiction machine rather than a quadcopter. And I know for some pilots that's going to turn them off, but actually I quite like the styling. The only question of course is how it takes crashes, and I've not really crashed it yet, so touch wood, that's not going to happen. But I think if you smashed into something that was hard and concrete or brick, then you would potentially be having to replace the parts. A lot of the parts in this are custom. Things like the flight controller and the power distribution board and everything else, as with a lot of the other Walkera products that are out there, are all very specific to this. So you're going to have to get the spares that are just for this model. But I imagine if you're interested in this, you're looking to buy it not because you want to build or maintain your own quadcopter, you just want the enjoyment of flying or moving on to a bigger model from something that's been a bit smaller. So at the front we have a 600 TVL line camera. I'll show you the quality of that when we do our little test hover and our flight later in the video, but I'm quite impressed with it. It gives a pretty nice image, saturation and light handling is very nice. We have two big bright white LEDs at the front. These are lovely for orientation. This gets small in the sky really quickly. The range on this for the FPV with this standard whip aerial is only, you know, kind of 100-150 meters, something like that, comfortably. There are two versions of this, one for the UK market with a limit of I think 25 milliwatts, and one for the non-EU market which has a higher power. To change the channel on that, you just pop open this little thing at the top, and once you're in there, there are some little dip switches and some other pieces too, so you can change everything. All that's covered in the manual. Now the one that I have here, and again there's two versions depending on the video transmitter power and specs, this one only supports 8 channels. All of those 8 channels are in the B FPV band, which is fine. You know, if you're going to have like a 40 channel transmitter, that's great. It talks a lot in the specs about this being 40 channel race band, but just be careful because the one we have here, which is for the UK market, only has 8 bands. Still works fine with the FPV kit that we've got. We can tune into it and it works perfectly, but do keep that in mind. The motors are something called WKWS17002s. No idea what that really means because there's no markings on here, but the flight performance with the little props that you get, and again you get some spares with this, is really nice. It hovers just above the 40% throttle and has lots and lots of power, so you can get it really cranked over, which is why it's quite cute. This camera's adjustable depending on how you want to fly. You can have it in whatever position. You can't change this when you're flying. You kind of set it and then that's how it is to fly, but when you're flying around you can get it really cranked over and it will do flips and rolls quite nicely. The underside is where the battery plugs in. The battery slide comes open. You have to pull open the tag for unlock and it slides open, and that's where the battery goes in. The battery itself is an 850 milliamp 7.4 volt unit, so it's a 2S LiPo battery, and it kind of fits in there, and the top slides over. Very, very neat and out the way. It does have different connectors from every other battery that I've got, unfortunately, so I'm very tempted to get another one so that I can fly longer than 7 minutes, which is about what I'm getting off a pack. But the question will always be how it's going to take a crash, and I think if you're going to get one of these, you need to make sure you're getting it from somewhere where you can get some spares. In the flying that we've been done, it's pretty solid, to be honest, but as we all know, if you slam into something at high speed, then it's amazing how what looked like really solid plastic will just give up the ghost. Just a couple of things here on the design. These undercuts mean that these props just clear everything, and I do like the way that they've really thought about giving the maximum cover for the size of prop. So that's the basic spec. Let's just go into the back garden and I'll show you the film of the very first hover. So the setup we're using here is we're going to record this image from the FPV camera on the ground station. We're going to pop the battery underneath into the model, but before you power anything on, we're going to need to make sure that the Devo 7 radio is turned on, and then when the model is turned on, it will bind automatically. So out in the back garden, we have it sat in the sunshine. In the top left hand corner, I'll inlay the DVR recorded footage, and as you can see, it's doing a really nice job. It's probably slightly a little too much colour from the camera, but it's doing a lovely job. And this is genuinely the first time we've actually fired this thing up and taken it out to hover, and it feels great. Actually, it's really well set up. So I've obviously put a little bit of effort into making sure that the clean flight and PIDs and everything that's on here is pretty reasonable, because I'm flying it around, it's kind of yawing nicely, it's stopping, turning left and right and panning around, and it gives a lot of confidence. It feels like a much larger, more stable quad, which wasn't something I was expecting. So now we're confident that it's going to fly and that it works and that I can use it with the FPV pieces, then I'll include some footage now at the larger field where I'm kind of flying around and flying it in a slightly more realistic way. This little guy is very fun to fly. Now, the first couple of quadcopters that Walkera came out with were a little bit disappointing, but this one seems to be an awful lot better. The fact they're using a modern flight controller is a big bonus. It means that we can use things like clean flight, and the behaviour is much more modern in the way it feels. Now, this is one of those models that gets really small in the air very quickly, even with the big LED lights at the front. Once you're about 50-60 yards away, it starts to get really small in the air, but it hovers beautifully around 35% throttle, so it's got more power than a beginner would potentially need. So for those of you that are coming into models where you want a little bit of room so you can do things like flips and rolls and racing and practice some racing maneuvers, then this is something that's worth considering. Punch outs and speed are very impressive for such a little model. The camera works really well and it's really fun to fly with FPV. Couple of quick tips. First of all, the little whip aerial that you get for the FPV stuff that comes with it is fine. You know, I'm getting kind of 100 yards out without any problem, without any breakup at all. I was actually flying in the video we've just been looking at with one of these. I just replaced that. Don't forget, you always need to have the aerial installed on the back of the model before you power it up. If you power up any transmitter without an antenna installed, you will damage the electronics. Other couple of comments about the model itself. It is quite small and low, so you will potentially need something to take off on if it's a field that hasn't been mown for a while. I'm carrying it in the box it came in, which kind of works very well. Putting the battery in can be a little bit exciting. The battery and the connectors, it's all a very tight fit. So I would recommend plug the battery in, set the model down and let it initialize completely. Count to kind of 10-15 seconds. That allows all the gyroscopes and accelerometers to be calibrated and working fine. Once that's done, then pick it up and then start playing around with the battery. I found here that I have to kind of plug them in and then tuck the wires down at the front and then slide the battery in behind. Once you do all that, you can slide the cover over without any problem. But it does take a couple of goes to figure out how you have to do that, so that's my tip. I'm going to get another one of these batteries because I'm finding that I'm having too much fun with it, and getting 7 or 8 minutes of flight time just isn't enough. The other thing I'll mention is the radio. Now, of course, this comes with the radio, so it's got everything in here that you need to go out and fly, and I've been flying with this and had no problems at all. This is the first Devo 7 radio that I've had, and initial impressions have been very good. In all the time I've been testing this little quadcopter with the radio, it's not let me down. So touch wood, you know, this seems to be a good one in terms of the construction, the feel of the gimbals, the switches, the positivity. It's not the most sophisticated of radios around there, but compared to some of the other radios that we've had with these ready to fly kits, this is a welcome increase in quality and usability. There is one thing I'd recommend on here though. The way it comes, if you open the battery compartment up at the back, then in that battery compartment is one of these things, and it requires 8 AA batteries. Now I don't want to spend all my money on Duracells or rechargeables, so the tip here is it's actually using a standard JST connector. So what I did, I had a look in all of my 3S LiPo batteries. There we go. And what I did is I just got hold of one of the 3S LiPo batteries that fitted and connected a little adapter onto the balance tap with a JST connector at the end, and that kind of runs it for the best part of a day without any problem at all. So I'd recommend that's a cool little mod. Get yourself a JST adapter, a little 3S battery. There are loads of batteries that are custom made for the Devo 7 if you look online, but this for me meant that I didn't have to keep emptying the kitchen drawers all the time of all of our AA batteries. So in summary, what do I think? Well, the question for this, for me, is always, who is this model aimed at? Because there are lots of people out there, myself included, that kind of like the carbon fibre look. But it's definitely going to be a good model to consider if you're looking at maybe not your first ever model, but you're looking to move up from a toy grade palm size something like the Hubsan X4 into something that's a little bit more professional, with a proper size radio that you've got to learn on, and that also has things like a modern flight controller, and you can play around with things like Clean Flight. A video transmitter, the camera's very good, the power to weight ratio on this they've actually put some effort into, so there's more power here than you need. It's very easy to hover smoothly and to fly around and to test and try out things like FPV. But if you want to be a bit of a lunatic and do flips and rolls, then you can pop it out of the angle mode and put it into essentially horizon mode in Clean Flight, and then you can also try things like rate mode and do flips and rolls. And this little guy can definitely go quickly, so you know, if you want to crank up that camera right to the front and fly it like you stole it, it'll also do that as well. Obviously, the challenge with this is going to be if you have a nasty crash. There are spare props in the kit, which is good, but this is a body that is a one piece. So at the moment I haven't seen all the spares starting to come onto the market yet, but hopefully they'll be around, because a couple of good crashes potentially could snap an arm if you hit something like a piece of concrete or the side of a building. Last comment I'd make here is do think about the antenna as well. I'm tempted to put a little bit of reinforcement around the back if the antenna gets snapped off as part of a crash, because this is a little bit exposed here. When it goes upside down, these things are going to get pushed and bent out the way, and this is the piece that's going to take the brunt of the crash. We'll just potentially think about that too. But this is a model that I like. I wasn't expecting much out of it at all because of its looks, because it looks like one of those toy things that you get out of the mall, but it is a far more capable model for those pilots who are looking to move up to something a little bit bigger, where they don't have to play with things like radio, setup and configuration, but they want the benefit of some more modern handling and flight controllers. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel, and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.